This race has really jumped around. We had Frank LaRose, the Secretary of State, leading this race back in November. And then Matt Dolan had the lead, as you mentioned, last week. But Trump's rally this weekend seems to have given Moreno a bit of a bump in our polling coming into today with a 10-point lead now.
A 10-point lead. So to Kailey's point, just a week ago, this entire race was reverse of what we have now. So Moreno at 38%, Dolan at 29%, LaRose at 12%. This is all about Trump then?
Yeah, this race has been interesting. If you look at that number of undecided voters, when we started off, it was at 50%. And even this weekend when we're polling, it was at 20%. But we didn't let those undecided voters off the hook in our polling. We pushed them into who would they actually choose. And that's where we see a bump for Dolan. So that 9-point, 10-point gap tightens to 4 to 5 points when we push these undecided voters, that 20%, suggesting that this race could tighten tomorrow on Election Day.
So it'll be a very interesting day indeed. Are voters discriminating issue-wise between the different individuals here? Are voters who are likely to vote for Moreno prioritizing something over the others?
Yeah, that's the immigration policy issues and economy. Those two break for Moreno. He's leading those voters. If you got into topics like education or healthcare, well, then Dolan is actually leading with like 70%. But the problem for Dolan is those issues are only top issues for about 4 or 5% of Republican primary voters. Immigration and the economy, they're combined for about 75% as the most important issue. So that gives Moreno a good position, at least on those two issues.
We're talking with Spencer Kimball from Emerson College Polling. Of course, this is the primary to find out who's going to run against Senator Sherrod Brown. A very important seat for Democrats, Spencer. And fascinating, in your most recent poll, you found out that he's actually doing pretty well, strangely, with Trump supporters. 8% of Trump voters plan to split their ticket and vote for Brown. So what kind of a situation is he in? This was said to be the political fight of his life.
Well, he's certainly in a dogfight. Depends on who gets the nomination. In our polling, he seems to run better against Moreno at this point than he does against Dolan in a general election. But what we're seeing in Ohio is very similar to what we're seeing in Arizona, Nevada, Montana, Pennsylvania, where Trump is leading against Biden, and yet all of these Democratic Senate candidates are leading their Republican challengers by 2 to 3 points, even in a state like Montana, where Trump is up by 15, 16 points. So we'll see if that ticket splitting survives, the fall. But that's what we're seeing at this time.
Well, and Spencer, that's what's so interesting is because here in Washington, the entire conversation about the balance of the Senate seems to be centered on Ohio and Montana. Tester and Brown are seen as the most vulnerable Democrats. Is your polling suggesting that maybe they aren't actually as vulnerable as previously thought?
Well, they're vulnerable, don't get me wrong, but they're not, they're not losing like Joe Manchin, who dropped out of the race in West Virginia because he was trailing in the polls by 13 points. They're not doing as well as Josh Hawley out of Missouri, who's leading by 10. But there's a little struggle for Ted Cruz down in Texas. The bigger concern I would have is out in Arizona, which is an open seat, and those are tough. Same thing in Michigan. You don't want to just dismiss open seats that the Democrats are going to keep those. But if they get that ticket split, or if there's a momentum towards Biden at the end of the day, we could see the Democrats maybe holding on to the Senate, but obviously losing West Virginia puts it generally at 50-50, so it'll come down to the presidential election if those other seats hold.
Well, I see as you look ahead to Pennsylvania, you've got Casey over McCormick in the Senate race there, 45% to 41%, which is fascinating here. I don't know, when we consider some of the numbers you have on Joe Biden and Donald Trump, if we can just touch the hypothetical for a moment here as well, Spencer, in a state like Pennsylvania, Donald Trump 47, Joe Biden 43, that's supposed to be home turf for Joe Biden. That's
so
a
Joe,
lost
what we're
race
seeing this cycle,
that happens.
To kind of explain what we're seeing in Pennsylvania, we're seeing it across the country, is 18 to 29-year-olds are voting more like 2000 or 2004 when John Kerry or Al Gore is the nominee, and not like when Barack Obama was the candidate. When Obama's the candidate, the youth vote breaks for the Democrats 2 to 1, and they were able to carry that in 2016 with Clinton, and to the same extent with Biden in 2020. What the polling this year is showing is that youth vote is no longer breaking 2-1. It looks maybe by a 10-point lead, and that's what Kerry won the youth vote by in 2004. And in some polls, it's split, and that's what Bush and Gore looked like in 2000. So this realignment of political ideology, particularly with the youth vote, is something that the Democrats are clearly concerned about.
There's also just the question of the undecided voters, Spencer. In that poll that Joe was referencing in Pennsylvania, about 10% of voters said they were still undecided in the presidential contest. Do you actually believe that? And is it going to be a matter of undecided voters actually choosing a candidate, or whether undecided voters choose to vote?
That's exactly it. Who comes out in this election? Remember, in 2020, we had a record turnout. It was during COVID. We had over 155 million people vote, 15 million more than in 2016. Is that 15 million going to come out again, or do they stay home? And where do they not break? And that's something that both parties are going to be working on. It's a state-by-state election here, but that's something that we're looking at too, as far as the enthusiasm gap that we have. And what's interesting is that while Biden might lack enthusiasm on the top of the ticket, these other Democratic candidates, like Sherrod Brown, as you mentioned, has more enthusiasm. So it's almost as if these down ballots might be able to carry Biden over the finish line in some of these states.